Joining me now is Assistant Minister for Trade and the Future Made in Australia, Tim Ayres. Thanks for your time. Labor was pretty quick to mock this. Have you read the entire report in detail and made sure you're across it rather than just sort of reflexively rejecting it?
Well, I'll just make three observations about it, Tom. I mean, this announcement, it's been 6 months, the costing, since the press release about imposing nuclear reactors on communities that don't want it. 6 months it's taken for these costs to be released. Now, put aside the big holes in the few hours that we've had them that have already been identified, Peter Dutton made his announcement essentially in secret. Could have been done in Canberra with the press gallery subjected to some scrutiny. He kept the announcement itself a secret, its location a secret, didn't invite any of the key press gallery journalists, any of the key economic commentators, did it with a soft audience in a small room in Brisbane because he's desperate to avoid scrutiny. He did it on the eve of Christmas. Could have done it any week over the course of the last 6 months. This bloke is such a shonk. This is a desperate effort to avoid proper scrutiny because the policy is a dog. It is absolutely impossible for him to explain how all this adds up. That's the first observation. Second observation, had nothing to say about cost for households. And we're in the middle of a period where the cost of living is having an impact in Australian households. The government's wrestling with these challenges. We've delivered cost of energy relief. Peter Dutton voted against it. And when he announces this giant boondoggle that we know at the very least will push household electricity prices up by $1,200 a year, when he announces this, he says nothing about cost. There's a tiny sentence in the report that dodges the question about cost for households. And thirdly, I just have to say to you, Tom, as the Assistant Minister for Future Made in Australia, one of the underpinning assumptions, you know what they say about assumptions, but the underpinning assumption is that the growth in electricity use in Australia will decrease. Well, in an era where the world is moving towards electrification of manufacturing and transport, that is a recipe for disinvestment in manufacturing.
Right, well, let me dive in on that. We've only got
manufacturing
so much time.
going offshore.
Let me dive in on that very point.
Manufacturing disaster.
Let me dive in on that point. So in terms of that, you're right, there's a step change versus a progressive. To decode that for our viewers, the step change means a lot more energy is being used, the progressive is less. If there is a scenario where, for example, one of the biggest assumptions is that green hydrogen doesn't take off as an industry, that is a possibility. It hasn't been proven at scale at the moment. If that happens, will Labor have built too much of an energy network that essentially isn't being used, or will you adjust on the run and not build more of the network?
What it means, Tom, all this stuff is just a blizzard of words. Like step change, like these people don't know what they're talking about. What it means is if you're the steel industry, this says go offshore. Go to a more rational policy environment. If you're heavy industry that are big users of gas or electricity, go offshore, Peter Dutton's saying. Don't bother knocking for future investments.
Might not take off.
If you're
will Labor build a grid?
That
essentially isn't needed, the size of it, if there's no green hydrogen?
No. Whatever the technological pathway, it's going to require electricity, huge volumes of it, and it will require gas. The pathway to green hydrogen, Tom, is through the gas industry. And we've got a plan that's renewables plus gas that gets the electricity that heavy industry needs, that delivers gas for peaking in the electricity system. A lot of focus on that, but we need gas for the East Coast manufacturers. This so-called proposal, you know, sort of the slowest moving forgery in Australian political history, is just the death knell of Australian manufacturing. It just says to all these regions that Peter Dutton claims to care about, it says no jobs for your kids, no opportunities for future generations in blue-collar work. It's over. This is turn the lights out. The idea that we're going to keep these coal power stations that have already announced their closure going until 2045 or 2050, I mean, it's just bunkum. You would only say that about these coal power stations if you'd never been in one.
Senator, and I've got to get another question in, if I may. You mentioned that there was no mention in of itself of what this would do for power bills. Chris Bowen did say that before the last election. $275 is be how much power bills would reduce by. That hasn't happened, has it?
Yeah. Well, what we've seen is a decade of policy inaction and disinvestment in electricity, a war in Ukraine that's provided an enormous spike in energy prices. Those have had an impact on household prices, no question, and made the job for government tough, making sure that we get renewables and storage, low-cost, reliable energy into the system. And Peter Dutton's answer to that is, firstly, typical political blame game. Secondly, let's go back to the Morrison period of dumb energy policy ideas and policy uncertainty.
10 years of lack of investment for not.
Well, it turns out if you do nothing,
getting that pledge done.
If you do nothing for a decade, it has an impact, Tom. Like it's 10 years of sitting on their hands.
But he knew the position then. He knew what had happened in that last 10 years and he made that pledge. It's not going to happen, is it?
At the end of it, Peter Dutton's answer is $1,200 extra for you and your household bill. That means that families at the end of every quarter when you get your bill have got to find $300 or $400 more. $1,200 a year, you can get root canal therapy for less. Like this is an absolute dog's breakfast of a policy that has no hope of achieving what it's supposed to achieve. And it's a bad thing for Australia that an alternative party of government turns up in such a sneaky, deceitful kind of way just before Christmas, dodging scrutiny, terrified of anybody asking them a question. This is utterly appalling, and the first thing they ought to do next week is apologise.
Time.
Thanks, Tom.
Well over
Merry
time.
Christmas.
I'm sure we'll talk about it more in the lead up to the election. Tim Ayres, you too.